Alright everybody, welcome back. This is week 6, that's February 1st to February 11th of our Chronological Bible Study. This is the Bible we're using in our Chronological Bible Study. In the first 3 weeks we completed the book of Genesis. Weeks 4 and 5 we went through the book of Job, and now we're in week 6. We're going to pick back up on our timeline. Now time is going to continue moving forward, and it's been a 400-year gap since we left Joseph and the Israelites in Egypt, and where we're picking back up with Moses. This week we're continuing on our progression of time moving forward in our chronological study. We finished off the patriarch era last week with the book of Job. We have been moving forward through the book of Genesis, through the creation era to the patriarch era. These were our horizontal books. Then we went to our vertical book of Job, which interjects during the time of Genesis. When we completed Job, we completed our patriarch era. Now this week we moved into the Exodus era, which includes what we're reading now, the book of Exodus. And you'll also notice that Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are all happening together at the same time during the Exodus era. So we'll be reading Exodus and Numbers, which will be our horizontal books where time is moving forward. And while those books are going on, we'll also be reading Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which will interject into that time frame that these books are going on. After they finally reach the Promised Land 40 years after they left Egypt, we'll go into the book of Joshua, which is the conquest era there. And that's where we'll pick back up. This is how our horizontal timeline will continue to move forward. We started out our reading over here in creation, and our timeline moved forward on into Noah, where we had the flood. That was the first big significant event. Shortly after Noah, we had the Babel event, where all the nations started spreading around the world through the tribes of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Now the Bible is centered down onto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and out of Jacob comes those 12 tribes. They went into Egypt, and then they're being brought out by Moses 400 years later. Between this red paper clip and this red paper clip is where our reading centers on this week. While the Israelites have been in Egypt and during their exodus, the pyramids have already been built. Chaldea has split up into the two nations, Babylon and Assyria. Out of the Greeks, you've got a nation of Troy. Those would be probably the descendants of Japheth. Athens established. Thebes is established. Italy has come on the scene now in a very basic way. Greek mythology has come on the scene as far as the way they explain creation with the gods and the titans and all of that. In the patriarch era, Abraham left Ur of the Chaldeans, moved up to Haran, and then moved down to the land of Canaan. Then Isaac and then Jacob came about. After that, Jacob moved his family down into the land of Goshen in Egypt. 400 years later, Moses takes the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, across the Red Sea, into the Sinai Peninsula, where they wander in the desert for 40 years. At the end of that 40 years of wandering, they will then invade, with Joshua now leading back into the land of Canaan, as was told to Abraham over 400 years earlier. Remember back to day 5 in Genesis 15. This is while God was making the covenant with Abraham. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land," speaking of Canaan, "for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." We pick back up this week with between 1200 and 1400 BC. But before we get there, we're going to flip over to Genesis 32 and hit on a few things. Now remember Genesis 32 verse 28. God told Jacob that your name will no longer be Jacob. From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. And that's what Israel means, is God fights. So this is where the name Israel comes from. And remember, we looked back at how our families, clans, tribes come in a nation. This is how the nation of Israel came about, and that's how they got the name Israel. God gave Jacob the name Israel, changed his name to Israel, which means God fights. And then Jacob had his 12 sons. One of them was named Joseph, was sold into slavery. He ended up there being a famine in the land. The 12 sons, eventually the entire nation, what is about 70 people at that point, moved into Egypt, into the land of Goshen. And then, as we just read, they'll be there for 400 years, and they'll be enslaved. And after 4 generations, they will come out of that land. We left off in Genesis 50, and verse 22 says, So Joseph and his brothers and their families continued to live in Egypt. Joseph lived to the age of 110. He lived to see 3 generations of descendants of his son Ephraim. Soon I will die, Joseph told his brothers, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And remember that Abraham covenant, the covenant that was made with Abraham was renewed with Isaac and then Jacob. And then Jacob's people, who is now Israel, moves into Egypt. And this is where Joseph is reminding his brothers and reminding his descendants that they're going to be taken out of there, as promised to Abraham, Joseph's grandfather. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, when God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you. And then so Joseph died at the age of 110. The Egyptians embalmed him, that's interesting, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Now remember that Joseph lived as an Egyptian. He had half Egyptian sons. He was an Egyptian ruler. So they embalmed him in the Egyptian way. He was placed in a coffin. So when they leave Egypt, they're going to take those bones with them, as they promised 400 years before that they were going to do. They weren't going to leave his bones in Egypt. We pick back up between 1300 and 1500 BC. I'm going to Exodus 1, verse 6. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, being that they were named after Jacob, the Israelites, the nation of Israel, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. They filled the land of Goshen. Eventually, a new king, a new Pharaoh, came to power in Egypt, who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. Now remember, Joseph was second in command to Pharaoh himself. And remember, we have this whole period where Egypt was taken over by a shepherd people, a Canaanite people, and then they were taken back over by the original Egyptian people. So however this falls into there, this new king likely has something to do with either this being the shepherd people that taken over, or this is the Egyptians that have taken over. They don't know of Joseph because they weren't in power at that time. Verse 11, so the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. In verse 15, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. This is a form of genocide, but a form of population control. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So then Pharaoh goes above that, and he says, the Pharaoh gave this order, this is verse 22, to all his people, throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. And we can see how a very evil order given by Pharaoh can be turned into something that coincides with God's plan later on. Because one of those boys that gets placed in the river is Moses. So about this time, this is chapter 2, verse 1. About this time, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi, this is important, they're from the tribe of Levi. Remember, what do we know about the tribe of Levi? Levi and Simeon, That was those two brothers that went in and they tricked the people into circumcising themselves in retaliation for the rape of their sister, Dinah. They used the circumcision, which is supposed to be the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. They used that as a way to trick those people into being under the weather so that they could go in and wipe them out and kill them. Because of that, Abraham said, when you finally get back to the land, you're not going to own any land. So keep track of that. The woman became pregnant. She gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby. She saw that he was special and kept him hidden for 3 months. So now he's 3 months old. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. So this is a very industrious mom. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. Now, if you don't know about the Nile River flows north because the high ground, Upper Egypt, is in southern Egypt. So the water flows out of the mountains down south and it flows to lower ground, which is the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile Delta. So the water flows north. So she's in the land of Goshen, which is already on the northern or northeast side of Egypt. That tells us that Pharaoh's palace, for Pharaoh's daughter to be living there, had to have been downstream from where they were. So this will give you an idea of the time frame that we're in, because as Egypt progressed, they moved from the high ground down south and they moved further and further and further to the coast. And by the time that the Alexander and the Ptolemies come about, they live in on the coast of the Mediterranean. And you'll see that if you follow Egyptology, any of those, the archaeology of Egypt, the older parts of Egypt are the more southern regions, and the newer parts of Egypt archaeology are in the north, because as time progressed, they followed basically the way that the river goes. They went north up towards the Mediterranean, out of the mountains, out of the high ground, into the low ground. So it gives us an idea where Moses' mom would have put him in the river and about what time frame we're at, because that means that the palace where Pharaoh's daughter would have to be downstream or north of wherever she placed him in the river at. In verse 5, so Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked on the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? So this is Miriam, most likely, Moses' sister, saying to the Egyptian princess, saying, should I go find a woman to nurse this baby for you? And of course the Egyptian princess is like, yes, do. So the girl went and got her mom. Miriam probably went and got her mom, Moses' actual mother, to nurse Moses. In verse 9, take this baby and nurse him for me, the Egyptian princess says. The princess told the baby's mother, I will pay you for your help. So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Now this woman, who was not supposed to have a child, this child was supposed to be killed, now she's being paid by Pharaoh's household to nurse her own child. Verse 10, later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. And this was probably at direction of the Pharaoh's daughter. The princess named him Moses, which means drew from the water, brought out of the water. She explained, I lifted him out of the water. Now there's a 40-year gap between there and where we pick up again in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. It just says many years later, but there's a 40-year gap there. So when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews. So he grew up knowing he was a Hebrew, but he was in Pharaoh's household because he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. So the jig is up. one of the other Hebrews taunts him about it. And Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. Now, if you remember our geography, Midian is quite a ways away. It's on the other side of the Fertile Crescent, over close to where Abraham had come from. So there's quite a distance there. He didn't just like leave the area and go out of town. Like he left all the way to the land of Midian. While he's there, he meets his wife and he starts to have children. And then years passed. This is actually 40 more years. So now Moses is 80 years old now. Years passed. The king of Egypt died, and the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. And God heard their groaning. This is verses 23 through 25, by the way. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We talked about at the beginning. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. So now you have Moses living a happy life. He escaped Egypt. He could have lived a happy life in Pharaoh's household, but he overreacted, slew this Egyptian, made enemies. The Hebrews knew what he did because they witnessed it, or word had got around about it. The Egyptians he was on their bad side, so he escaped, and he's been living happily for 40 years over in the land of Midian, being a shepherd. And now, all of a sudden, God decides it's time. It's time. And now, Moses, being his chosen person, that he saved from the river through all those little circumstances, of Pharaoh's daughter, seeing him being raised there, being nursed by his mom. God allowed all these things to happen, directed these things to happen so that Moses could survive for this moment. And remember, in previous weeks we talked about, like, we don't understand why God does things the way that he does them. Sometimes it makes no sense to us, but in his mind, in his purpose, there's a reason for it. You may not know why you're late for work this morning, or why your car broke down, or why you had a flat tire or whatever, but it could be because you play a small role in a chain of events that needs to take place for him to accomplish his purpose. And although that really sucks for you to have a flat tire, it plays a key part in whatever it is that he's going to accomplish. And most of us go through life not really knowing what that end goal is, what that end state is. Well, we don't understand the big picture. We will one day when we get to heaven. We're going to understand that. But in our limited humanity that we exist in right now, it's hard for us to see that. And so this is God explaining his ways to us in this written down account of Moses. And remember, 40 years had passed before he left Egypt, and now 40 more years have passed now that he's been in Midian. We pick back up in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. Now this is the mountain that's in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula we showed you on the map earlier, where Moses was going to lead them across the Red Sea into that little triangle-shaped piece of land. There, that's the Sinai Peninsula. Mountain of Sinai is on that peninsula there. So he's way out there with his sheep. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement, though the bush was engulfed in flames and didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. So he saw that out in the distance. There was a bush burning, but it wasn't. Usually the fire will go out and burn down, but this was just blazing, just continued to blaze. So I got to go see this. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." So this is God identifying himself to Moses. Remember, there's been 400 years through that, and all that they've known is that there was a covenant made with Abraham that was renewed through Isaac, renewed through Jacob, and Jacob was their father, Israel, who brought them into the land of Egypt. That's all Moses knows at this point. He knows about God, but he doesn't know a lot about God. He's going to learn a lot more. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. All those ites we talked about several videos ago. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harsh the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel, out of Egypt. And why are they his people? Because these are the people that are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom he made that covenant with. So God doesn't break promises. He's fulfilling his promise. Verse 11. Moses protested to God, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? I'm just a shepherd out here in the desert. Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign. Here's your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. So this is God giving Moses a sign, letting him know that truly this is God speaking to him, because he's telling him in the future, when you bring them out of Egypt, you're going to come back to this very mountain and you're going to worship right here. Moses goes on and protests some more. He says, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And that is the name of God, I am. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, which is our translation, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. Now go and call together all the elders of Israel. Tell them, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me. He told me, I have been watching closely and I've seen the Egyptians are treating you. I have promised to rescue you from your oppression in Egypt. I promised Abraham to do that. I will lead you to the land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, those are the people that's been living in the land of Canaan, what we call the land of Canaan, all those years. And remember, he said it wasn't quite ready for invasion yet. It wasn't quite ready for him to take over because the iniquities of the Amorites had not gotten worthy of being wiped out or pushed out of the land. He says, the elders of Israel will accept your message. Then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey in the wilderness, offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my hand and strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them. Then at least he will let you go. And I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. That's key. He will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. Remember back when, way back in Genesis 15, he said that they would look favorably on them. So this is God saying again, 400 years later, they will look favorably on you. They will give you gifts when you go, so you will not leave empty-handed. Every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled. He goes on, Moses again pleads, Lord, please send anyone else. Verse 14, then the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said, but what about your brother, Aaron, the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he is on his way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. Talk to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what to do. Aaron will be your spokesman to the people. He will be your mouthpiece, and you will stand in the place of God for him, telling him what to say. Now, this kind of sets the stage for the future, because Moses is going to be the leader of the people, but Aaron is going to be the priest of the people. Aaron will be the first Levitical priest of that time. Moses is going to get the direction from God and then give that direction to Aaron, and then Aaron's going to perform that function. So in the same way, as they're talking to Pharaoh, this is God kind of training them up for what they're going to be doing later on. Moses and Aaron go speak to Pharaoh. They go, and then Pharaoh decides, no, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to make y'all work even harder. So this creates resistance with the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people become rebellious. So they start to think bad of Moses and Aaron because they're just stirring up trouble. Now life is even harder for them than it was before. And then they show some signs. And then he goes back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh refuses him again. So then begins the plagues. There's 10 plagues altogether. These 10 plagues actually attack 10 of the supposed gods of Egypt. In Egypt, all life revolves around the Nile River. The Nile flows, it brings life. Their whole religion revolves around the gods associated with this river. Once a year it will flood its banks, it will get really, really wide, and then it'll recede again, and it'll leave very fertile land to farm on. Like it's this whole ecosystem which God has designed that Egyptian religion centers around. And around this ebb and flow of these seasons and everything, they have these gods that are in charge of each specific thing. So the first plague is when God turns the water to blood. This is a direct attack on Hapi, or H-A-P-I, Hapi or Hapi, who was the god of the Nile. He was also the god of fertility, prosperity, and abundance. The second plague is frogs, attacking Heket, H-E-K-E-T, Heket, which is a goddess for fertility. She's associated with the flooding of the Nile, and she was depicted with the head of a frog. And the third plague, gnats or lice, right? Depending on your translation, are they gnats or they're lice. So remember, Moses or Aaron, they strike the ground with the staff, they strike the dust, and the dust comes up and becomes all these gnats or lice that go and they bother all the Egyptians. And the god of the earth is Geb. The next one was flies. That's associated with Khepri, who was the god of mourning, was associated with the scarab beetle. Fifth plague is the death of livestock, and this is a direct correlation with Hathor, H-A-T-H-O-R, Hathor, which was the goddess of fertility and love. She was depicted as a cow, so there's your livestock. The sixth plague was boils, attacking Shkemet, S-C-K-H-M-E-T, the goddess of medicine. The seventh plague was hail, in correlation with Nut, the goddess of the sky. So it's not like the goddess of the sky is raining hail down on them. Each time, Pharaoh tells Moses that, yes, I'll let your people go and just get this plague to end. And each time he does, and then the Lord hardens his heart, and then this next iteration of plague happens. The eighth plague is locusts. This could be correlated to Set, the god of storms, disorder, vegetation, and agriculture, because locusts would eat all the agriculture, eat all the vegetation. Also, locusts look like a storm. Sometimes they can cloud the sky. There's so many of them, so kind of look like a storm coming in. And the ninth plague was darkness, and this directly correlates with Ra, the god of the sun. So darkness falls all over Egypt, but not Goshen. It shows the Egyptians that Ra is not in control of the sun. God, the God of the Hebrews, is in control of the sun. And the 10th plague finally is Passover. And this directly affects Pharaoh because he loses his son, as do the rest of the Egyptians. They lose their firstborn. Pharaoh claims to be God. So this last one, which finally breaks Pharaoh, is God showing Pharaoh that he is not a God. He is not God. He is just a man. And he can die, and he can take his son from him, just like he can take his son from any other Egyptian. And that's finally the one that has some kind of effect on Pharaoh, and Pharaoh lets them go at that point. Exodus 12 Verse 1, while the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. So this is important because God resets their calendar here. He says, this month is going to be the first month of the year for you. And the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, is not the same as the Roman calendar. We use the Roman calendar currently. This is going to be the first month of the year. Announce to the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, which is the first month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice, one animal for each household. Verse 5, it says the animal you select must be a 1-year-old male, either sheep or a goat, with no defects. That's important, just like we talked about with previous sacrifices before this in Genesis. When you are selecting an animal to keep in your herd, you always pick the best animals and you get rid of the ones with blemishes, the ones with what we call a cull, the ones that maybe they don't have the right characteristics, the right conformation, maybe they have some kind of defect, right? You get rid of those. Well, what God is saying, take your very best one and give that one to me. And this is it goes against our own agrarian principles of making your herd better. So a cattleman or a herdsman wants to make his herd better by retaining the best animals and getting rid of the ones with blemishes. And God actually says, he tells them, take your best animal, the one with no blemish, and then give it to me. Okay, so this is key to this because this is how much it is an actual sacrifice. They are really sacrificing. This is a real sacrifice. This is not a well, this one's only got, this one's got a curved hoof, or this one's got this, so I'll give that one, I'll sacrifice that one. No. This is the best one. So it really is a sacrifice to do that. In doing that, you're losing your chance to refine your herd or refine your flock in that. Also key in these directions is verse 6. It says, take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 14th day of this first month. So not only do they pick the best out of their flock for this sacrifice, but they also take care of this animal for 14 days. So during this 14 days, you can imagine your children are petting this lamb, you're feeding this one by hand, you're growing fond of it, it's growing fond of you, you're building this relationship with this animal, and it is actually going to hurt. It will actually be a sacrifice when you give up this animal. When you make that sacrifice, it's going to hurt more because you have built a relationship with them. This is like your dog gave birth to puppies. You've watched this puppy grow up. This is the best of the litter. And now you're going to bring it into your house and feed it by hand for 14 days and let your children build a relationship with it. And you're going to grow fond feeding this puppy for 14 days. And then at the end of that 14 days, you're going to have to sacrifice this animal after having built that fondness and then the animal growing fond of you. And so you see the significance of the sacrifice here isn't just a sheep out there in the flock. Okay, you got to pick one of those sheep out there in the pasture and take it up there and let's sacrifice it. No, this is a much more personal relationship that you have with this animal, and it is a sacrifice. We're going to slaughter the lamb or the young goat at twilight. Okay, so this is the twilight after the 14 days. Verse 7, then take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and top of the door frames of the houses where you eat the animal. The same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with the bitter salad, greens, and bread made without yeast. So what's different than a puppy is we don't eat our puppies. This is an actual animal that they do commonly eat. The difference is, instead of like being a cow like all the other cows, or being a sheep like all the other sheep out in the pasture, this is a sheep that has been selected from the flock and set aside for that. Verse 10, it says, do not leave any of it till the next morning. Burn whatever is not eaten before morning. Verse 11, instructions for eating the meal. Be fully dressed. Wear your sandals. Carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. Remember those gods we were talking about. He's going to execute judgment against them. But the blood of your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land. This is important. This is a day, verse 14, this is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is the law for all time, and is still observed today. For 7 days, the bread you eat must be made without yeast. This is talking about the festival of unleavened bread. So you have the Passover, the festival of unleavened bread. They're going to continue this on even until modern day. They're going to continue on this practice. Verse 24. Remember, these instructions are a permanent law that you and your descendants must observe forever. When you enter the land the Lord has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this ceremony. Then your children will ask, what does this ceremony mean? And the reason for that is they're going to continue doing it is for this purpose. Because the children are going to ask, why do we do this? And you will reply, it's the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he has passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt, and they spared our families. So after this has come to pass, Pharaoh actually tells them they can go. Down in chapter 12, verse 36, the Lord caused the Egyptians, remember we talked about this twice already, the Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites. This is it actually coming to fruition. He told Abraham, he told Moses when he was over there in Midian, and now it's actually happening. Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. That night the people of Israel left Ramses and started for Succoth, which was, they were up north. And there were about 600,000 men, plus all women and children. So if you add women and children, and then you add, it says, verse 38, a rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks, herds, and livestock. You can guess there's probably about 2 million, around 2 million people leaving out of the land of Goshen, leaving Egypt now, following Moses. Verse 40, the people of Israel lived in Egypt for 430 years. In fact, it was on the last day of the 430th year that all the Lord's forces, keyword, forces, the Lord's forces, what does Israel mean? It means God fights. So the Lord's forces left the land. On this night the Lord kept his promise to bring his people out of the land of Egypt, which he had made with Abraham. So this night belongs to him, and it must be commemorated every year by all the Israelites from generation to generation. So that's the Passover, which starts the festival of unleavened bread. Exodus 13, the Lord said to Moses, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, dedicate to me every firstborn among the Israelites. The first offspring to be born of both humans and animals belongs to me. Now remember this comes into play later on, because so at this point every firstborn is supposed to be dedicated to the Lord. Put that in the back of your mind. In verse 11, this is what you must do when the Lord fulfills the promise he swore to you and to your ancestors. When he gives you the land where the Canaanites now live, you must present all the firstborn sons and firstborn male animals to the Lord, for they belong to him. A firstborn donkey may be bought back from the Lord by presenting a lamb or a young goat in its place. But if you do not buy it back, you must break its neck. It still has to go to the Lord, dead or alive. It's got to go to the Lord. However, you must buy back every firstborn son. And in the future, your children will ask you, what does all this mean? Then you will tell them, with the power of his mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, the place of our slavery. The Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go. So the Lord killed all the firstborn males throughout the land of Egypt, both people and animals. That is why we now sacrifice all the firstborn males to the Lord, except that the firstborn sons are always bought back. This ceremony will be like a mark branded on your hand or your forehead. It is a reminder that the power of the Lord's mighty hand brought us out of Egypt. So the Lord's setting this up so that this is a generational thing. He's taking this, people have been in Egypt, have been consumed with Egyptian culture, didn't even really want to leave Egypt after all that, and then now he's trying to teach them his ways, the ways that he's directing them to live, and then also give them a path to remember it for hereafter. So when Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. So they're leaving out of Goshen, the north end of Egypt, okay, and they need to go to the land of Canaan, which borders the Mediterranean Sea up here. They could just go straight north through the land of the Philistines. We call today that general area as Gaza, to the land of Canaan. Instead of going that way, he leads them along a different way. The Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. That is key also. So they went about them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. So they're actually going south towards the Red Sea. Instead of going north, the direct path, they're going south. Verse 9, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Now remember, that was the promise that they made to Joseph when he died. For Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear to do this. He said, God will certainly come to help you. When he does, you must take my bones with you from this place. Remember, we read about that in Genesis 50. The Lord went ahead of them. He guided them. A pillar of cloud in the day, a pillar of fire at night. So he's showing them which way to go. Or they just have to follow. All right. Then the Egyptian Pharaoh decides that, you know what? No, I don't actually want to let all you guys go. So he grabs up a bunch of chariots and he pursues. Verse 10 of chapter 14. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? You'll see this happen again and again and again. The people just keep questioning. They see these miracles over and over and over. So far they've seen the 10 plagues. They've seen these miracles happen, and they're like, why did you bring us out here just to die in the wilderness? And you'll see this. This is a reoccurring pattern. They'll see miracle after miracle after miracle, and then they'll get mad at Moses and they'll question him and all this, and God will give some kind of sign and show them that, look, well, I am God. I'm all powerful, and all you have to do is trust me. Over and over and over this happens. Verse 11, they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? Why have you done this to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. But Moses told them, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. And the Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. For time's sake, they find themselves on the bank of the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are closing in on them, and they part the Red Sea. They walk through the Red Sea, and there's walls of water on both sides. After all the Israelites get across, the walls of water come crashing down and kill the Egyptians that are in the middle of the sea at that point. So they then are delivered from Egypt. Pharaoh is no longer chasing them. Exodus chapter 15, obviously they're in the desert, Sinai Peninsula in the desert. There's hardly any water out there, but they find a place that they call Mara, and they complain. Verse 24, the people complain. They turn against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help. The Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it in the water, and this made the water good to drink. So then they leave Mara. Now they're in between Mount Sinai, where he first saw the burning bush over there, way back when. They're between there and where they left out at Mara. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. Verse 2, there too the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now we have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. So then Lord provides again. Moses goes to the Lord provides again. Manna and quail. He has quail that are on the ground, and then the substance called manna settles on the ground in the morning. They just collect it and they can eat it. They collect it and make cakes out of it. Then there's rules with that also. The whole thing is that they're learning to become dependent on the Lord and not dependent upon their own thinking and their own resources. Exodus 17, as the Lord commanded, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sinai and moved from place to place. Eventually they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Quiet, Moses replied. Why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, our livestock with thirst? Moses cried out to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you, witnesses. I will stand before you on the rock in Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and the water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink. So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. This is key to remember here. Remember, he's told here, remember this in your mind, here Moses is told to strike the rock, and he obeys and he strikes the rock. He does exactly what God tells him to do. He strikes the rock with his staff. Then they get attacked by those Amalekites that we talked about. We were talking about the descendants of Esau. We were talking about following the ites. Remember your descendant of Esau, one of his descendants was Amalek. And these are the people who descended from Amalek. They attack. So these are like distant cousins of theirs. Exodus 19. 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt, after breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and set up camp there at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. Speaking of Jacob, the descendants of Israel, the nation of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples of the earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. So Moses returned from the mountain and called together the elders of the people, told them everything the Lord had commanded him, and all the people responded together, we will do everything the Lord has commanded. So Moses brought the people's answer back to the Lord. The people then agree to this covenant, that they're going to do whatever the Lord tells them to do. Keep in mind, they've now seen the 10 plagues. They've walked through the Red Sea with walls of water on both sides on dry ground. They've seen bread and quail come from heaven, and they've eaten it. They've seen water come from a rock, and they've drunk it. They've seen water, bitter water turned into good water by throwing a stick in it. They've seen all these miracles. Now, they've agreed to this covenant with God. He gives them the 10 commandments. We're not going to go through the 10 commandments, but basically, you must not have no other God before me. You must not make yourself an idol. You must not misuse the name of the Lord. Remember to observe the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house, livestock, wife, any of that. So you don't covet. So he gives them these commandments. And he starts to give them all these other laws also. This is how you are to live. A lot of these laws are just good ideas to like be sanitary, healthy people in a healthy society. They're just like common sense kind of things. The Big 10 serve a purpose, okay, and they actually get inscribed on these tablets. So he goes through the proper use of altars, fair treatment of slaves, then cases of personal injury, protection of property, social responsibility. He goes through all these different rules, and we could go through them one by one, but we would be in a much longer video. In Exodus 23, they're told to celebrate 3 festivals in God's honor. First, celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. We already learned about that on the night of the Exodus. The second festival, celebrate the festival of the harvest. When you bring me the first crops of your harvest. Finally, to celebrate the festival of the final harvest. That's the third one. At the end of the harvest season, when you have harvested all your crops from your fields. 3 times each year, every man in Israel must appear before the sovereign, the Lord. Exodus 23, verse 27. I'll send you my terror ahead of you and create panic among all the people whose lands you've invaded. I will make all of your enemies turn and run. I will send terror ahead of you to drive out all those people. You'll see this in the book of Joshua, the next horizontal book that we read. I will drive them out a little at a time until your population has increased enough to take possession of the land. And I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the eastern wilderness to the Euphrates River. So he gives them the land boundaries of how big their land is supposed to be. All the way to the Euphrates, not just to the Jordan, all the way to the Euphrates River. I will hand over to you the people now living in the land, and you will drive them out ahead of you. Make no treaties with them. Remember this, part 2. Make no treaties with them or their gods. They must not live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me. If you serve their gods, you will be caught in the trap of idolatry. Chapter 24. Moses carefully wrote down all the Lord's instructions. This is verse 4. Early the next morning, Moses got up and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. He also set up 12 pillars, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He took the book of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. Again, they all responded, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded. We will obey." Moses took the blood from the basin and splattered it all over the people, declaring, "Look, this blood confirms the covenant the Lord has made with you in giving you these instructions." What confirms the covenant? The blood. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain. Stay there. I will give you the tablets of stone on which I have inscribed the instructions and command to you. You can teach the people." Moses climbed up the mountain. Moses disappeared into the climb. As he climbed higher up in the mountain, he remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And while he's up there, he gets these directions on how to build the tabernacle and its furnishings. The tabernacle is going to be the mobile temple. They're going to center their worship around this mobile temple called the tabernacle. It's basically a big tent. But he says, go to the people, gather all this stuff for construction of the tabernacle, and they'll bring it to you. And then he gives them very specific directions on how to build this ark. And verse 21 of chapter 25, it says, place inside the ark the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. So he's going to place inside the ark those stone tablets that he just gave them. Then put the atonement cover on the top, and I will meet with you there and talk to you, speaking to Moses, talk to you from above the atonement cover between the gold cherubim, which are these angels that are on top of the covenant, on the ark, that hover over the ark of the covenant. From there I will give you my commands for the people of Israel. So that's where Moses is going to come and talk to God. The ark will be inside this tabernacle, this giant temple that they're building. So then he gives them directions for the table, the lampstand that we call a menorah. He gives them directions for how to build the tabernacle, exactly how to build it, how to sew the curtains together, how to build the wooden crossbars, how many feet there are supposed to be long, how wide it's supposed to be. Plans for the altar that they will make sacrifices on, the courtyard outside the tabernacle. Verse 20, he says, command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil of pressed olives for the light to keep the lamps burning continually. The lampstand will stand in the tabernacle in front of the inner curtain that shields the ark of the covenant. Aaron must keep the lamps burning in the Lord's presence all night. So you'll have this big tent, and in the back of that tent, on the west side of that tent, there's going to be another partition. Inside that partition is going to be the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark of the Covenant is going to be the tablets. Then you've got a curtain, and this is the Holy of Holies. And then on the other side of that curtain, you have the Holy Place. And inside there is going to be your menorah, your lampstand, and your table presence there where the showbread is going to be, and you'll have your incense altar inside there. So priests will be able to come inside there, but inside there is where Moses is actually going to speak with the Lord in that Holy of Holies. Then he goes through the clothing for the priests. He's going to designate very specific clothing for Aaron and his sons. Now remember these names of his sons: Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. We're going to run into those again. Then the Lord gives them directions how to design this ephod, which is like this thing that goes on the outside of his clothing. On it is 2 onyx stones that engrave on them the names of the tribes of Israel. Also he has this other breastplate that he wears, this chest piece that he wears. It also has a stone representing each of the tribes of Israel. And that all that comes into when Aaron puts that on, and he is acting as a intermediary for the Hebrew people. He represents all of the tribes of Israel, all of the people of Israel. He represents in the acts that he is doing, and that's why those are there so that he can remember that. He's not only acting as Aaron, he's acting as Israel when he makes sacrifices or whatever it is he's doing in there. Verse 40, make tunics, sashes, special head coverings that are glorious and beautiful. Clothe your brother Aaron and his sons with their garments, and then anoint and ordain them, consecrate them so they can serve as priests. And that is a whole deal there in chapter 29 of how, if you read that, that's a really intense process. What we call ordination today, maybe a preacher or a priest or whatever, they get recognized and they get ordained by the church as having some kind of, sometimes as having authority, sometimes it's just they get recognized as a teacher of the word, depending on the denomination. Here, the ordination ceremony is much different than anything we would go through today. This is the last verse of chapter 28. This is a permanent law for Aaron and all his descendants after him. We see that Aaron now is going to serve as the priest, and all his descendants after him will have to continue in this. Therefore, the descendants of Aaron will serve as the priests of this nation of Israel. And we go through the consecration ceremony in chapter 29. Remember, Moses is still on top of the mountain speaking with the Lord during these 40 days. Moses is diligently probably writing this down. He gives them plans for the incense altar, which will go inside the holy place, inside the tabernacle. And then he gives them direction on how to collect money for the tabernacle. Exodus chapter 30, verses 11 through 12 are key, because we're going to come back to this when we get to David. David's going to take a census, and the Lord's going to get angry with him. And David was supposed to write down his copy of the law. I don't think David does that, because then he makes this mistake here. But this is where the actual directions for the census is given. Here in verse 11 it says, the Lord said to Moses, whenever you take a census of the people of Israel, meaning you count all the people, each man who is counted must pay a ransom for himself to the Lord. Then no plague, keyword plague, will strike the people as you count them. Each person who is counted must give a small piece of silver as a sacred offering to the Lord. This payment is half a shekel based on the sanctuary shekel, which equals 20 gerahs. They're using this sanctuary shekel as the base currency to which to base their economy on. In the future, that whole monetary system is based on the value of the sanctuary shekel. He gives directions for the wash basin that the priests have to wash their hands and their feet in. He gives directions of how to make the anointing oil, how to make the incense. And then he designates 2 craftsmen, one from the tribe of Judah, one from the tribe of Dan, to actually construct all this stuff. Then he gives instructions for the Sabbath. Chapter 31, verse 12. Be careful to keep my Sabbath day, for the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation. This is a covenant obligation for all time. It is a permanent sign of my covenant with the people of Israel. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the 7th day he stopped working and was refreshed. When the Lord finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him 2 stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant, written by the finger of God. Remember, the covenant was made with Noah and all of creation. The sign was the rainbow. And then we had the Abrahamic covenant. And the sign of that covenant was the circumcision. And now we have the Mosaic covenant made with the people of Israel. And the sign of that covenant is the Sabbath. And it says repeatedly, this is the sign to keep my Sabbath day, for the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation. We have all these covenants. This covenant was made specifically with Israel. We're going to pick up next week on February 11th, day 42. We're going to see what happens when Moses comes back down after those 40 days, and he's going to present all this information. He's probably thinking, well, all right, we got a tabernacle to build. I got to make clothes for Aaron and his sons. We've got stuff to do. We're going to get this ball rolling. Now we have some direction. And he's probably super excited. He's going to come down from the mountain, When he gets down there, he's going to see the people of Israel have been idiots. We're going to pick that back up next week. We'll see how the Lord deals with that. The Levites, remember, that's the tribe that Aaron and Moses come from. The role of the Levites are going to come to even more of a more important role. And it's going to have something to do with those. Remember, he said you got to give the firstborn of every family to me, give them back to me. It's going to have something to do with that. I hope you enjoy your reading this week. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can contact me on Facebook or email. Y'all have a good week.